Welcome to ETAuto Pre-Budget Panel Discussion. This union budget becomes one of the most important for Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, as this falls in between demonetization and UP and other state elections. The Finance Minister has a tough task to do a balancing act of pleasing the masses as well as industry. ETAuto brings the honchos from the auto industry to discuss what are their expectations. So let me introduce to you our esteemed panelists for this panel discussion. First of all, we have Mr. Arun Malhotra, Managing Director of Nissan India. We have Mr. Ashok Taneja, who has been past President of ACMA, and he is also Managing Director and CEO of Shriram Pistons and Rings. We also have Mr. Vinod Aggarwal, who is Managing Director and CEO of VECV. We have Mr. Nikunj Sanghi, who has been President of FADA. He is also taking care of the international affair at FADA. Welcome to ETAuto Pre-Budget Discussion, sir. This budget is really one of the toughest budget for the people as well as government. This is coming immediately after demonetization, which really shook the country, from rural to urban to every corner of the country was hit by it. What are your expectations from this government? Do you think when the government has priority of lifting their popularity, which has gone down after this announcement, will they have enough to offer for the industry this time? Mr. Malhotra, we'll start with you.
Well, obviously, as you rightly mentioned, the demonetization has had an impact on the GDP growth rate. IMF has just come out, lowered the projections by about 1%, and they've increased the projection for China. But having said that, I think government has set a plan of motion and action, and clearly the negative impact of demonetization is withering out. So, and this is also the time, a budget just before the GST regime is being rolled out in 3-4 months. So government needs to even tread very carefully and chalk out clear plans, and not only signals for this year, but also for a long-term plan. Clearly, more people in the tax bracket, which demonetization of the objectives was. Definitely the tax structure is not very attractive, especially for corporates and also for individuals, to make it more broad-based and more attractive, and have a lot of focus on investments on infrastructure and also on rural employment generation, because clearly one of the things which has got adversely impacted by demonetization is the rural areas. The markets in the rural areas are more adversely impacted. So obviously a lot of action has to happen. Some things which have to be set right so as to give confidence to the public at large, because there was a lot of negativity and government would like to shore up its popularity, but also to set up a clear roadmap for business, for industry and for people.
Mr. Taneja, I'll bring you in this. So, do you think that the government, the finance minister, will have enough in his kitty for industries like yours?
The country is at a very interesting crossroad at the moment. If I may say, it's a sweet moment for the country. The government finances are very strong. Tax collections have been at a record high. The mood in the market, the sentiment in the market is positive. People are, of course, expecting a lot from the government post-demonetization. And I think the government is in a position to do a lot. This is the time to first take care of job creation, which is the biggest pain point for the average person. For job creation, they have to promote manufacturing. And within manufacturing, there is no sector better than the auto sector where large number of people could find gainful employment. So if this budget gives any impetus to manufacturing, whether by way of taxation, reduced taxation, or more moderate taxation, or by way of promoting investments, this will lead to a very encouraging situation for the manufacturing sector and lead to job creation, which is not only good for the economy, it's good for the social well-being of the people.
So this budget has a lot to do, especially in job creation and lifting up the sentiment. What is your take on this, Mr. Aggarwal?
No, definitely I think government can do a lot this time. The most important from the trucking industry point of view is spending on the infrastructure. If you look at the last budget, government had kept aside 550,000 crores for the planned expenditure. We are expecting that this year, with government finances being strong, they should allocate even more than that, and they should bring in lot more thrust on the spending. because one of the impact of demonetization is the rural consumption, that is the worst impacted, and government has to do something to spur that consumption, because right now the GDP growth estimates for current year, if it is down by 1%, I think that is directly the result of consumption, and if the consumption is down, then of course the trucking industry will be down. So government has to do something to bring back that consumption, which earlier it was there, because of demonetization it has dropped.
So, coming back to you, Mr. Sanghi, when we talk about consumption, you are the people who face it from the front. What is your expectation from the finance minister this time around?
So, I think what we expect is easing of the situation, because unless they ease up this situation, there won't be consumption, there won't be job creation, and there won't be manufacturing, because unless inventories move, manufacturing cannot happen, and inventories will only move if they improve the sentiment. The government is also has the UP elections just around the corner. I don't think they would like to take any tough calls at this time impacting the common man, because I think somewhere the budget will focus on the common man because of the UP elections, or the 5 states, not just the UP, Punjab, Manipur. So we definitely expect a lot of populist rhetoric in this budget, but I think the government will fall short of taking some corrective actions. 2 reasons. One is GST, which is now likely to happen in July, and 2, these election results. I think these 2 will impact policy, and that policy should come out a little later.
So, as Mr. Nikunj Sanghi just mentioned, the government may lean towards more of populist measures because of the obvious reasons, that is the upcoming elections. 2 of you, how do you look at it? The government, where can the government make happy industries as well as please the people of UP and other electioneering states? How are they going to do this balancing act? This is very tough. Start with you, Mr. Malhotra.
The first, I think the objective of the government will be to improve the overall general sentiment, because demonetization impact the sentiment, even the common man had taken a hit. So they would try to get back, and there will be some populist, because government's coffers are fairly full with all the money coming into, and the financial position, as Mr. Taneja mentioned, we are sitting on a good kitty. So good utilization which spurs demand, and spurs demand not only in urban areas but across the country is important. And if you spur demand, then spurring the demand, then consumption, then manufacturing, all the things follow in progress. So there have to be a lot of initiatives to be followed. The other thing is the government has been talking of a lot of making India as an export hub. So 2 things clearly required. One is obviously a corporate tax are still very high as per international standards. So the corporate taxes need to be more streamlined. You need to widen the base, but they need to be more streamlined or brought down. And second, I think there's still a challenge if you have to compete on the world economy, the ease of doing business. Still, all the independent reports which rank countries on the basis of ease of doing business, we still are in the latter half, we are in the lower half. So making some policy guidelines, digitization definitely has an impact, that how it can help. But clearly the common man, and the common man, whether it's a salaried class employee or people in the small traders and shopkeepers, agriculturists, there will be something for all of them. And for corporates, ease of doing business and taxation structure being streamlined will be a major impetus.
So corporate tax has been always an issue. We have always been complaining. We don't see it coming to comfortable region. How do you look at it?
It's very important for corporate tax to be moderated, and I hope there will be some steps taken in this budget in this direction.
But they have a rule.
Reducing corporate tax is not going to kickstart consumption or kickstart investments. What we need right now is to actually do something which in the short term will promote consumption and will lead to investment. These are the 2 areas which, in my view, the government should be looking at, and I'm very confident they will be looking at. For example, in the auto sector, if investments start in a big way in infrastructure building, whether it is highways or it is Gram Sadak Yojana or it is minor irrigation projects, these can all get started fairly fast, because the government has been working on these things for a long time now. Concurrently, some accelerated depreciation for the investments which are made at this point of time, accelerated depreciation if you buy capital goods which are made in India, then there is a dual impact which takes place. These will all change the sentiment and the job market rapidly. So we need to do something where the impact will be felt within weeks and months and not in the long term. Yes, I will welcome a moderation of taxes, both corporate taxes as well as when they come with GST. We hope it is not aimed at maximizing revenue, but at achieving the goal of commonizing a market and creating a more competitive environment in the country.
So you want to add something?
I think what he said is absolutely correct, because some visible steps where consumption can get a kickstart. That's, I think, what is required. The other thing I think which is important is there are, although there's a roadmap on GST, but some clear guidelines how GST emerges, and GST is important for the auto industry. And there we're expecting, because GST is covering up a lot of issues in terms of central sales tax, excise duty, local sales tax. But still the bugbear remains a certain local taxes which are absolutely local, decided by every state, registration road tax, which can dramatically change the entire impact of excise in this thing. And the government, because of the federal structure, has no control. So somehow I don't know how that has to be brought also under the GST ambit.
That's very important, because still that remains, we wanted to simplify, but still you go to different state, different taxes on road tax and etc. etc. Mr. Aggarwal, for you, interest rates on vehicle loans etc. for you also, Mr. Sanghi, becomes very important. Do you think there is a room for this to come down, because we have seen the situation right now, and liquidity? How are you looking at the liquidity in the market, because there is no cash almost? So how do you look at it, changing in coming days? Do you think it will impact?
No, definitely at the ground level, the interest rates still have to come down. Even though the banks have recently passed on the reduction in the interest rates by around 90 basis points, most of the big banks they have passed on this. But then, what is the actual rate at which the vehicles are financed? I think those are still high. Maybe they are giving these final rates to very good AAA plus clients, but then if you look at what is the vehicle financing rate, I think those are still high. Especially, for example, lot of vehicles are replaced, then the used trucks have to be sold. Today used trucks, they are not getting financed, and used trucks are the most impacted because of the cash crunch, because most of the used trucks were bought with cash. Now those trucks right now, that market is absolutely down.
So do you expect some step?
No, these steps budget? Basically, if the banks can do something to finance the used trucks market, I think that will bring back that sort of demand. The other thing which we expect from this budget is very clear policy decision on the scrapping policy for the old trucks. Like for example, if you take the number of vehicles which were registered between 1990 and 2000, that's I think around 30 million total vehicles, including two-wheelers, cars and commercial vehicles. So if those vehicles have to be replaced, or these vehicles are the vehicles which are contributing most to the pollution or the ambient quality of the air quality. So I think this policy has been going back and forth, and it's getting discussed for quite some time now. I think it's time now to come out with that policy, and that will spur a lot of demand. And at the same time, I think it will also add to the government revenues, because additional demand will contribute to the additional revenues. And even though they may have to give, say, 50% benefit on the taxes, and at the same time it will also generate a lot of scrap which can be used to meet our scrap requirements. It will also generate employment, additional employment, if there are scrap yards which are going to be opened for scrapping all these huge number of trucks, that will generate employment.
So you are expecting some announcement
so
on
I'm
this
saying
line?
this has to be,
I think.
This has to be firmed up.
If there was to be a single decision in the auto sector which can lead to an immediate growth in demand, improve the pollution levels and also put safer vehicles on the road, it is the end of life of vehicle policy. I think it is begging to be introduced.
5 years
Quickly.
we are shouting with
Absolutely, I think what Mr. Taneja said absolutely critical, and this has been hanging fire for a long time. So the government has to bite the bullet and take a strong view on this.
Yeah, and let me add, we are seeing a sudden spurt in the demand for trucks at the moment. This is clearly pre-buying before the Euro 4 norms or the BS4 norms kick in from April. And because GST is not likely to be introduced before July, we are seeing the period April to June, there will be a big dip in the demand for commercial vehicles. If the vehicle scrappage policy could be introduced in this budget and implemented before 31st March, then the period April onwards, one can see a huge growth in demand for trucks or buses or whichever vehicles are covered under the scrappage policy. This will lead to immediate increase in jobs. And I think this will fulfill the dual objective of the social well-being of people by providing them wholesome jobs and also accelerating the manufacturing sector, which has upstream and downstream linkages, very vital for the overall growth.
But we don't have any infrastructure ready for this as of now. We have 1 or 2 scrap yards only. Level, I think one previous
those have
group.
to be created. No? That
So
will
by
come.
March, do we think we will be able to do that?
It's eventually a matter of
Chicken and egg.
taking a decision, setting a time deadline, and moving on. There are scrappage yards all over the world. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can benchmark with the practices that are already well established in several countries in the world. We can see how they fit into the Indian environment and get going. And if we are willing to rope in private sector to set up these scrappage units, I'm sure they will move at double speed to make it happen.
So going back to the rate of interest, what is your opinion,
So
Mr.
I think
Sanghi?
2 things need to be done. One is, like Mr. Aggarwal said, that the reduction in rate of interest needs to get passed on to the consumer. Besides that, with the kind of kitty that the government has on taxes, I think a major reduction in the lower slabs, which means giving more money in the hands of the common man. I think the slabs are unviable for the small common man, and lowering down the slabs would actually mean better compliance. And with the kind of money which has come into the banks, I think more and more people are going to be paying taxes. The tax net is going to broaden. And if that's going to happen, I think one big reform which the government can do is have a major reduction in tax slabs.
We did a survey and around 70% of the people wanted that the tax slab, income tax slab for salaried people should go between 3.5 lakh to 4 lakh. So that is the biggest demand. Some of them are asking for, they wrote comment that we need 5 lakh at least.
So 5 lakhs is what people are talking about.
Yeah.
With
So
the kind of tax net that they are now created, with so much money coming into banks and almost everybody getting into banking, and even Jan Dhan accounts have huge amount of money which has come in. I think the government can afford to do some very radical changes in the way people are taxed.
but this tax, if it is, this is, that the slab is increased, we see new tax being introduced every time. Like we have seen recently, Swachh Bharat and all. What kind of impact these taxes have, and do you think it is really working?
I think Arun Malhotra covered that very well. We need simplification of taxes.
So we every
We don't
day,
need
now
multiplicity
education
of
says we have 3 types of education says. So
So cess on cess, and then you lose track. And where's the cess money going?
Yeah, that
What is the benefit is being derived out of it? And I think what Nikunj rightly mentioned, the opportunity for the government is after demonetization or the digitization and with excess because of digitization of everybody's account and money, how to broaden the tax base. You have a great opportunity. You can really reduce the tax, but still increase the tax collection by broadening the tax base. Because sometimes the figures, number of people, individuals who pay tax, say the last time the Prime Minister mentioned only 24 lakhs people are above 10 lakhs, and some ridiculous figures are thrown out. They look very laughable. So there's a great opportunity in this, and it's possible now.
So these largely what we see, there are businessmen, small businessmen like earning 50 crore, 10 crore, 5 crore. These people are not paying tax. They are in large numbers. Do you think that there is something being done for them?
There is no substitute for governance. There is no substitute for enforcement of laws in a very even-handed manner. No matter whether tax rates are moderate or not so moderate, it is important to act on the laws to ensure that there is better tax compliance. I think given that point, what is important is to put more money in the hands of the lower middle class, put more money into the hands of the average worker, and this can happen by kick-starting investment in infrastructure projects, by introducing a scrappage policy which will lead to immediate spurt in demand for trucks and other vehicles. It can be done by reducing the first level of income tax by raising the limit up to, let's say, 4 or 5 lakhs rupees. Because whatever money goes into the hands of the lower middle class or the average worker, it is used for consumption, and that has a multiplier effect. If you were to give the same amount of money in the hands of the rich, perhaps it will go into some kind of savings or may not get utilized immediately. We need something that will provide an immediate impetus to consumption.
And that's very important. Some quick action should be taken. That is
talking about small businessmen not paying taxes. I think GST would answer a lot of those questions. Okay. I think with GST implementation, a lot of tax evasion from small business would go. Okay. And if tax evasion from small business goes, the tax base of businessmen would broaden to a huge extent. I think the biggest advantage of putting in a legislation like GST is to reduce tax evasion. More and more people get into compliance. So I think GST is a big opportunity. They have complicated it for the time being, but I guess that complication was required to get everybody on board. And going forward, at least I am very hopeful that they'll simplify the GST. The GST in the present form as is being rolled out is hardly a GST, with the number of slabs, the number of cesses, then the division of powers between the state and the center, 90% being taxed by him, 10%. So this is going to be a nightmare.
In management we say that complexity is cost. So we have to focus on simplicity.
So do you think
we have to make it easier to comply with law?
So the upcoming GST, do you think it is going to be as simple as we expected 4 or 5 years ago?
But I think it's a good beginning, you can say, so because the things will fall in place once you are able to put it in motion. I think definitely the simplification process will continue, but at the same time, I think some of the cesses which are there, like the R&D cess or NCCD cess or the road taxes, which we have to subsume some of these cesses into the GST. So that you can, already GST rates, I think we have come out with almost equal to the current rates of excise duty plus VAT. It is already whatever rates they have indicated.
So there are 5 slabs.
They are already almost equal to the same rates. So why not you put these cesses also into the GST?
So that was the motto when it was perceived, make it simple.
And the quality, because the implementation quality will also get impacted. The more complex you make, the poorer will the quality of implementation or the transmission losses. So it's in their interest to make it simple. And unlike demonetization where the government didn't have time,
they want some work to be done for the next subsequent government. They want to leave that for reforms.
See,
or they don't want to complete it one.
They say well begun is half done. So you have to take the first step right. Otherwise it can be a problem.
For government is, it is also very difficult to bring in consensus with states and the center, with so many states. And no one wants to leave there far. Basically everyone wants to control some part of it. That's the reason it's a lot of discussion going on that how much I will control, how much who will control.
And my view is slightly different. But while I would welcome if the GST rates were moderate, for example, in auto components, we would expect it to be 18% and not the standard rate of 18% and not 28%. This is primarily because the higher the rate of tax you keep, the more is the counterfeiting, the sale of spurious goods, the more is the encouragement to people who are outside the tax net to participate in this business. That does no good to the consumer, it does no good to the government, it does no good to anybody. So I would like to see moderate rates. But more important, even if the rates were not moderate, we would like to see a simple GST with no complications, easy to understand, easy to implement, because simplicity itself leads to cost competitiveness.
Yeah, that's a very imperative line you have just. We talk about Make in India, so we are providing ease of doing business for the foreign companies also come and do business. We are inviting FII, FDI. And when we look at the Indian component manufacturers especially, they do not have that kind of R&D, capabilities. And the government was offering around 200% of WEC deduction. So that was also rolled back to 150%. How do you look at this? What is your expectation for this?
I think it's a very important point you have made. If we want to really make in India, then we have to also design in India.
Yeah, that's very important.
To capture the bigger portion of the value. But having made that point, please remember, majority of vehicles being introduced in India today have a local content of upwards of 80%. That is because the component industry in India has developed the capability to design, develop, test and deliver to specifications. Number two, auto component industry is about $40 billion turnover industry. $11 billion turnover comes from exports. Most of it is exports to Europe, United States and countries like that. This is testimony to the fact that the capability of the component sector is growing. But 28% of the turnover of auto component industry is exports.
But
is
most
growing
of them
at
are
18%
through joint ventures and TA, technical
it doesn't
alliance.
matter whether the manufacturing unit in India is foreign owned, it's a joint venture or it's an Indian entity. What is important is the value creation must happen in India. When value creation happens in India, then design will happen in India. And when that happens, it will lead to jobs, it will lead to multiplier effect which comes through manufacturing. Unfortunately, this was the moment when the component industry was best poised to invest in the R&D. We have change in emission norms which are kicking in from April this year, and once again the BS6 norms which come in April 2020. This is a time for component sector to make higher investment and higher commitment in R&D. And unfortunately, the government has taken a decision that 200% weighted reduction for R&D will be reduced to 150% from April this year and will further reduce to 100% in April 2020. R&D requires long-term commitment of funds, long-term commitment of resources. You cannot change policy every 2 years or 3 years. Then serious R&D will not happen and we will become import dependent. I already fear that with the Euro norms kicking in 2020, within the next 3 years, whether the component industry will be able to create India's specific solutions which are more cost effective based on local R&D, or we'll pick solutions off the shelf and bring them to India, making our vehicles more expensive.
So that's a valid point. What is your take on it?
I think R&D and design are the foundation for manufacturing. And if you have to, again, as Mr. Taneja mentioned, the country. So you need to, and our share of R&D expenditure in the Indian industry, I'm not talking about auto industry or component industry, even the Indian industry is very low. Government has to go to the extra mile to do it. We have become an IT superpower, but we have not become a manufacturing superpower. Why? What do we lack which China has? Clearly, I mean, we have developed our industry, the infrastructure is there, the component industry is there, the manufacturing culture is there. Even for last years, we have hubs of manufacturing across the country. So R&D and design, whichever companies are ready to invest in R&D and design, whether they're domestic companies or they're joint venture, we need to incentivize them. And back rolling some things which is a positive thing will have a negative impact. Because manufacturing Today you are India, today anybody can manufacture, Vietnam can come up another country or some other country can come up. But if you have a very solid manufacturing R&D base, you will be always innovative and you will always have that barrier to entry or that competitive edge in the industry.
There's another, issue that the automotive industry is, dealing with. That is the import of raw material becomes costlier than some of the finished goods, like when we talk about alloy and all. So, do you expect the finance minister or the government to do something about this in this budget? Because it's been the case for last 2-3 years, the industry has been asking for.
Component sector has in several dialogues with the government made a statement that we are willing to compete with every nation in the world, but please take away inverted duty structure.
Yeah.
Today we have so many free trade agreements with Thailand, with ASEAN. We have specific agreements, preferential agreements with Japan, with Korea, which allows import of goods at preferential rates of duty, in many cases 0 rate of duty, but the raw materials that we require to manufacture those are suffering duty. So whether it is secondary aluminum alloy or it is alloy steel, these all attract duties, import duties, but products made from these raw materials can come in at 0 rate of duty. Clearly this needs to be corrected. This request is already with the government and I'm sure they will look at something like this very favorably.
How do you look at it, sir? Because you are sitting at the other side.
Clearly, your duty structure which is there, it has to be a level playing field. I don't think the age of protectionism has to weather out. But you need to have a level playing field that companies, if you're going to produce something, manufacture something, and you need raw material, you're not importing something finished good. It definitely deserves a better deal. That's what the way I see it.
There's very important, let's come back to vehicle now, cars especially. It's been 1 decade, when, excise duty relaxation was given to the cars below 4 meter or sub 4 meter as we call it. Don't you think because of this we saw a lot of compromise happening on this vehicle? Some hatchback with the boot came in, some longer vehicle just chopped off, and there was in terms of design we saw, in terms of durability, in terms of a lot of things were done. Do you think the government should do away with this this time? Because bigger cars are taxed more, smaller why? Why should we have such a difference?
There are the pluses and minuses to both of it. Clearly, when we have a low excise, the excise is based on the CC engine capacity and based on the length.
Yeah.
So in some way, it covers it up. And so the companies have become more innovative also to utilize that benefit of the 4 meter thing. But what was very odd was the differential in tax structure was phenomenal. You have one side 10-12%, other side you have 27%. Because anyway, if a vehicle is higher priced, it will anyway get a larger collection. So that disparity, the band was too high. I still believe, because we need to be a world manufacturing hub for say small cars or compact cars, and probably we have a middle class.
Yeah.
But we need to do this, and we need to do a much more rational basis, because even every country has it. Japan has a 660cc base, which they give excise, the special concessions and taxation. So clearly they are there. But once you have started it, let it remain. Have lesser slabs, but don't have too much of taxes. There's knee-jerk reactions. Sometimes we had on ground clearance, sometimes we have on this thing. Have a clear roadmap across. And the taxation structure cannot be that diverse from 12 to 26.
So the gap should come down, and there should be.
But definitely for smaller vehicles or compact vehicles, because India is a large emerging economy for small cars, and we have the largest virtually the two-wheeler base. We sell so many two-wheelers in the country, more than 12 to 13 lakhs two-wheelers. Clearly, I think there is a preferential treatment, but don't make it so lopsided. And don't make whimsical decisions based on some diesel, sometimes CC capacity, sometimes on ground clearance. Those have to be avoided.
Frankly, I have no comments on whether there should be differential treatment for smaller or medium or large size cars. It is for the auto industry. They have more insights in this area. But we must remember 2 things. Number one, in Japan, they have a K car, which is below 660cc, if I recollect. These attract preferential tax treatment because the government of Japan wanted to promote smaller vehicles which are more suited to their road network, especially in the smaller towns. And these now constitute a very large portion of the vehicles sold in Japan. Similarly, Thailand has introduced the concept of an eco car, which is a small car. These are not only more fuel efficient cars, they occupy less road space, they are good for movement within the city. So there is enough precedence in the world. We have to look at our infrastructure, India's specific needs, and then take decisions accordingly. Having made that point, whether you make sub 4 meter cars or you make bigger cars, component industry is ready to support all of them.
That's not a problem for component makers. Sir, coming back to you, dealers have been asking for industry status for a long time. Do you think this government is now ready to give you that? And have you made some representation of?
So,
because you are losing a lot of advantage, and really I see a lot of dealers who have become bigger than some of the OEMs also. So I think it's high time the government should consider, you know,
so
that.
I think FADA has been working on it, and our recent meeting with the Honorable Finance Minister was mainly directed to give auto retail the industry status. What we put on plate was that we are recognized as industry by the Industry Ministry. We are covered by the Industrial Disputes Act, by the Factories Act, by every possible, the Minimum Wages Act, the Payment of Wages Act, the Bonus Act, everything that you can think about. Only the Finance Ministry does not consider us as industry.
Okay.
As a result of which, our working capital and term loan both are very expensive as compared to industry, in spite of the fact that we are the biggest employment generators. Mr. Taneja was talking about employment in auto industry. The findings of the survey are that if there are 10 million jobs in the auto industry, 7 million come from auto retail. And this is direct employment. I'm not talking of indirect employment in insurance, finance and repair shops. Be that so, I think it is extremely important for the government to grant us industry status, so that we not only get interest benefits, we also get MSME benefits, because any dealership, a two-wheeler dealership on an average employs about 100 people, a car dealership employs about 250 people, and 300 people are employed by a commercial vehicle dealership. I am not including tractors. If you include tractors, each tractor dealership, the smallest, employs about 30 people. And ours is inclusive growth. So we don't get people to come into cities or to industrial hubs. We go and create employment in the smallest corner of the country. And we promote youth to stay there in their villages and not make an urban nightmare. So I think we are talking of inclusive growth, we are talking of employment, and we are talking of organized employment. So high time auto retail is given industry status.
So I would like to have comment from all of you. Infrastructure, that is the real, you know, backbone for the industry to grow. Do you think we need to further step up, and what should be the measure to, you know, increase investment? How can we improve the infrastructure situation in India, because we are going to have more cars, 5 million we are saying 2020. Do we have road? We are going to have more trucks and everything. If we look at the MP, we see you know, manifold growth. So do we have really that kind of infrastructure? What is it not the right time for the government to really put an impetus on this? Start with you.
Infrastructure, clearly this is one area where we have our major constraints. We are lacking. I think the two things. One is projects which have been cleared as concepts. How fast you put it into implementation and actual completion. Even projects are clear, number of clearances required, even after clearances required, some tax laws or some cases going on at the ground level. So how can you look at a window that whatever is cleared is done faster? So second, I think, which is important, is when you have to look at infrastructure, you have to take a slightly longer term view. The only positive example of infrastructure I see, if you see the city of Chandigarh, designed 40 years back, it is still the most geared up city in terms of infrastructure. Whereas in, whether it's Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, it is just bursting on the seams, Gurgaon, because the vision is only, or the thought is only 2-3 years. So when we are talking about infrastructure, that's the second part. The third is infrastructure, public-private participation. This was a concept which was picked on. Somehow it's got slowed down over the last years. because massive investments are required. So how do you get private sector also to invest? I mean, there are toll road gates, there are tolls even, there are various other things of sharing. So infrastructure has to get a focus and fast implementation on ground. Because unlike IT industry, infrastructure moves on ground, and on ground the number of obstacles or number of bottlenecks or number of transmission losses can be very high. So somebody must be looking at these projects. And as Mr. Taneja mentioned and mentioned by Mr. Nikunj Sanghi, infrastructure is the best way to generate employment, because across the country, and if you generate employment at the lower level, middle level, you spur consumption, and if you spur consumption, then everything gets into a virtuous cycle.
Further investments in infrastructure and faster investments in infrastructure, do we have a choice? Is there another country in the world that went from a developing country to a developed country without building a very strong infrastructure? It is the prerequisite for almost any country to seek the rates of growth that we are seeking, which is 8% and above, so that large number of people from below poverty line can actually come into mainstream. Number two, if I divide infrastructure in two parts, one is the highway infrastructure, the rural roads, this infrastructure within the cities, I completely agree with Arun Malhotra that this is something we need to take a longer term view, make massive investments. It's an investment where you will not go wrong.
Absolutely.
You cannot go wrong. It will only lead to benefits and multiplier benefits. There is another area which is housing. If this area receives more attention, and I'm very hopeful the way this government has addressed this question of low cost housing and housing for all by, I think, in the next 10 or 15 years, it is this big vision that can transform the employment scene, consumption scene, and GDP growth scene. Housing sector has an impact on employment in a big way. Plus, it has a very big impact on the white goods industry, the electrical goods industry, and the like. So the multiplier effect is very large. It also has social benefits. We need to have not only look at GDP growth figures, we need to look at how it is impacting the common man and making life simpler for the common man through better infrastructure and better housing can make a very big difference.
What's your take on
No, I
it?
think
Because
the
for
most-
you it is very important.
Yeah, most important is the execution at the ground level. I think there are a lot of obstacles which come at the ground level. For example, land acquisition or even the availability of contractors. If today the biggest bottleneck is there are no people who are ready to take on the contracts, because most of the existing contractors are under financial distress. So how do you get them out of that? And most of them have suffered because there was a lot of delay in execution of projects because of various reasons which were not under their control. So I think these are the things which government has to take note of and come out with a very clear policy on solving the issues, and how do you improve the execution, speed up. And then of course there are other projects like smart cities, even though there is a lot of announcements. So I think a lot of fast work has to happen on that. And then of course linking of rivers, because if you have to increase irrigation or improve the entire infrastructure in the country, I think that is again one very important initiative. So I think there are a lot of things which can be done.
So my take on this is that one thing which our political class will need to do is rise up the political divide. A lot of infrastructure suffers because of political divide. Initiatives taken by one government are abandoned by the next government, and that is how contractors suffer, that is how delays take place. The priorities change. So if you have a rail line, a survey happens by one government, the next government doesn't want to do it, they want some other area, so again a survey happens, and the survey which was already done is wasted. So I think our political class needs to rise above political parties and have a consensus at least on infrastructure, because that's going to benefit all of them. And once that is done, I'm sure a lot of these bottlenecks that we talk about at the ground level would get removed. And I think, like all co-panelists said, the starting point is infrastructure for any country to graduate from developing to developed. So, and our political class realizes it. So if they just rise up their political divide, I'm sure it can be done.
So we have a little time left, so we'll take quickly one or two questions. I'll tell you from the survey, and we'll take your comments on that. Firstly, we asked the question, what kind of impact demonetization had? So 70% of the respondents said that our business went down by 50 to 60%. So what is your take on it? How do you look at this? Are these realistic number or?
Depends on who you ask the question, because
So we asked auto component maker, we asked OEM, we asked dealers.
So, you know,
So
if you take November as only as the base, probably those decrease of 40-50% is there.
Last 55 days.
But December industry did come back. Now it vary across segments even, because two-wheelers still has not come back. December was a bad month for two-wheelers. Four-wheelers relatively did better. But I don't believe on a weighted average for the organized industry it's not 50%. But for the unorganized sector, for the SMEs, definitely it's been very badly hit.
Biggest hurt has been felt by the two-wheeler sector.
And commercial vehicle.
But we are seeing other sectors, including tractors, including commercial vehicles, including passenger vehicles. Customers are coming back to showrooms. We have good schedules for components from manufacturers like Maruti Suzuki. Also, the two-wheeler market is better in January than it was in December. And therefore, it's a matter of time that we'll be back on the growth path. Please remember, we have a lot of unmet demand for automobiles. The penetration level of automobiles in our country is very low. There's millions of people who are aspiring to own their first vehicle. So issues like demonetization can delay the purchase, but it has to come back into the market. So I think it's just a matter of weeks before we will see normalcy return.
No,
So
I think the month of November and December we had the worst impact in the commercial vehicle industry, and because these are the 2 months when we had expected growth to be there in the industry, and as against growth we had the drop. So if you compare with respect to the growth expectation and the actual drop, I would say the drop was around 30 to 35%. Even though the actual drop with respect to last year on year it would have been around say 12 to 15%, but if you look at with respect to the expectation, it was 30% drop, because our inventory and everything was planned with respect to the growth pre-November. And suddenly when this drop happened, then we had to adjust our inventories and we had to cut down the production to bring down the inventory in line with that.
So your comment becomes very important because you are the actual seller.
I would say that it's very diverse, and definitely dealerships were the worst hit in terms of what happened with demonetization, because inventory levels went up, sales went down. But there were exceptions like Maruti, exceptions like probably a Quid, or where there was a waiting list. So if you look at the overall industry and if you average it out, then probably what Mr. Aggarwal said, 25-30% was the right figure. But if you go into individual manufacturers, if you go into individual segments, then there were some segments which were really hit more than even 50-55%. And I can tell you on behalf of dealers that dealers still are operating on a very high inventory, an extremely high inventory. And it doesn't look like correction would happen in weeks, like Mr. Taneja said. I think the correction is going to take long. One, because the cash crunch, and the government has accepted it, the cash crunch will take at least another quarter to get over with. And more than the cash crunch, I think it is the uncertainty and some of the industries which have closed down, which were dependent purely on human labor. People in construction, people in textiles, people in labor, in leather, and I think even components and manufacturing, because of the cut in production schedules, the shutdowns which plants had, a lot of contractual labor was retrenched. So the impact of that retrenchment, they'll be re-employed, but the impact of that retrenchment will take a little longer to correct.
So we asked a question that for dealers specifically, what did you ever had such high inventory in last 10 years? So majority of them said ki we never had such, only around 10% Ren said, yes, we had such high inventory in the past.
That's why this budget is very important.
Yeah. So
This is a time to turn around the sentiment, bring the consumer back in the market, and clear these inventories.
So how long will it take? The respondents say that it will take at least 4 to 6 months to come back to normal. Do you think that is the right time? All
I
of
think it
you.
will come back earlier. If you remember 2008, when we had the subprime crisis, also we had the unfortunate incident of the Taj Hotel, the killing by terrorists. The industry was absolutely the doldrums, and I think India recovered faster. And in January, it was kicking and going well. And a lot will depend on the signals or the actions the government takes in the budget. I think the potential to come back faster is there if the government doesn't squander away. So I'm still optimist. I believe it will come back earlier. But as Nikunj said, there are some things which were dependent. The industry is totally cash dependent. Small manufacturing, brick owners or something. Those, I think it might take a longer time.
What is your opinion? For you, it
I'm
will start.
optimistic.
Yeah.
Even though component industry depends on demand from the vehicle industry for its sustenance, but I believe the demand will come back faster than we are visualizing. Things are gradually returning to normal, and it is only a matter of weeks and not of months before we are back on track of high growth. We are seeing record business from the truck industry in this quarter.
Yeah.
Yes, it may be because of pre-buy with the implementation of BS4 norms. But who knows, this budget might come with a policy that leads to higher demand from April onwards or March onwards. And we have a different segment of the market, say the tractor segment of the market, which can take off. So as a component manufacturer, I remain hopeful. Demand will come back to normal within weeks, and we will be on a normal growth track within weeks.
So in a quick wrap up, we'll just wrap up. What are the top 3 wish list for all of you? We'll start with Mr. Malhotra.
So, if I take across industry, I think investment in infrastructure, clear policy guidelines in respect to GST, and as far as the auto industry is concerned, guidelines, policies which are consistent with time, and clearly lowering of the tax structure and widening of the tax base.
I won't repeat the wish list which Arun Malhotra has said. So let me add the 3 next items in the wish list. First is retain 200% weighted deduction for R&D. Second, accelerated depreciation on investment in plant and equipment so that there is an immediate spurt in demand for investment in new plants. And number 3, income tax rates, especially at the lower levels, to be moderated so that there is more money in the hands of people, leading to an increase in consumption.
So I will add 2 more, what has been said. Scrapping of the old vehicles, I think if they come out with that, then of course I think maybe from April onwards also we will have good demand. And then I am expecting that Finance Minister should maintain the consistency. So there should be no retrospective amendments and there should be no surprises which should impact the confidence.
So lower interest rates, of course the budget doesn't impact, it's more a monetary policy, but budget definitely gives a direction. So lower interest rates is one, and putting more money in the hands of the common man to spur consumption. And one way of doing it is of course higher tax slabs at the lower level, which means a minimum of 5 lakhs when you are not taxed. And I think that will really be a huge spur in demand. And I think the sentiment, I remember having once met Mr. Ratan Tata, and he said that the Indian auto industry moves on sentiment and not actuals. If the sentiment is good, the buying is good. So something like this to improve sentiment, and I am sure if sentiment improves, then I will agree with Mr. Taneja that it's weeks and not months, and when we are back on track.
Thank you, gentlemen, for such insightful discussion. So what we find out from this discussion, that there are few things that is really important apart from sentiment. How will the sentiment come? You guys are saying that moderate rate of interest, income tax should be widened, then you are talking about infrastructure, that is very important, and job creation. These few things are really necessary for the finance minister to help the sentiment grow for automotive industry. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.